wasn't easy to hunt under these conditions. The temperature was 10 below. The wind chill was 40 below. But they had found some elk tracks. And the people back in their village, they were starving. They needed to find that elk. There were 3 of them. His mysterious feather, shifting wind, and Inkpaduta's son, Firecloud. As the 3 Dakota men moved through the trees into the opening beyond, they could see 5 men, all with long guns, standing in a circle around the same set of elk tracks. They were white men, settlers, and like the Dakota, their families were hungry too. As it turns out, this horrendous winter seemed to be trying to kill everyone. One of the men had a large, dangerous-looking dog sitting next to him. And as the Dakota men approached the settlers seemed to know what they wanted. Apparently, there was not going to be any discussion about who had a right to hunt the elk. The man with the dog shouted a command, and the dog lunged forward, teeth bared, growling, snarling, directly at Shifting Wind. But Shifting Wind was too fast. He raised his rifle and shot the dog before the dog could get within 5 feet. And then the owner of the dog was too fast for anyone to stop. He jumped forward, raised his rifle, and struck Shifting Wind between the eyes with the butt of that rifle, knocking him to the ground. And then while the other 4 settlers kept their rifles trained on the Dakota Sioux, he proceeded to beat Shifting Wind as he lay on the ground, stomping and kicking him. When he was done, he grabbed Shifting Wind's rifle and turned and walked away, followed by the other 4 men, who occasionally looked back just in case the Dakota Sioux intended to do anything about what had just happened. This little encounter occurred near Smithland, Iowa, in January or early February 1857, literally a month or a month and a half before Abbie Gardner's family was massacred, 85 miles away in Spirit Lake. Smithland is important, and I want to talk about that. But first, I want to talk a little bit about how Inkpaduta's band got to Smithland. As Inkpaduta and his band moved from Minnesota into Iowa to winter, they apparently bypassed Spirit Lake and settled for a time in Peterson, Iowa. That would have been about the time the massive snowstorm hit on December 1, 1856. This is Peterson, Iowa today. It's a small town, maybe 350 people. Back then, in 1856, when Inkpaduta visited this little town, it really wasn't a town. It was founded that very same year and consisted of a number of scattered homesteads. Really probably didn't have a store or a school or anything like that. Like most of the little towns during this period of time, it was nestled up next to a river. In Peterson's case, it was the Little Sioux River. Things went well, actually, in Peterson. The settlers shared food with the Dakota Sioux, and the Dakota traded with the settlers. However, for some reason, Inkpaduta decided to move his band further to the southwest, and they followed the Little Sioux River 55 miles to Smithland, Iowa. This is Smithland today, very small, maybe 180 or 190 people live there. Back then, again, like most places, it was a bunch of scattered homesteads. Lake Peterson, located next to the Little Sioux River. You can still see the area where Inkpaduta set up his camp outside Smithland, Iowa. If you look at the video at the very top, you'll see a tree line there. That's the tree line for the Little Sioux River, and he camped just on this side of the Little Sioux River, again about 2 miles outside of town. Inkpaduta reached Smithland on December 9, 1856, again about 8 days after the big storm had hit Iowa. When they reached Smithland, they erected 9 lodges or teepees. The group was fairly small, only about 40 people, with maybe 16 or 17 of them being warriors. And they ended up staying there for about the next 2 months. For most of that time, all went well between the Dakota and the settlers in Smithland. Things were quiet, things were sociable. They got along well with the settlers, trading beadwork and other crafts for clothes and corn and pork. But as winter conditions worsened, with blizzards coming and going, temperatures staying low, resources dwindled, and the settlers at Smithland began to see the Dakota Sioux as a problem, and there were incidents. We already talked about the incident involving the elk hunt. There were others. On one occasion, a Dakota hunter shot and wounded a deer. He trailed it for quite some time, following the blood trail, and when he got there, the white settlers were claiming that deer. On another occasion, some of the Dakota women were able to dig through the snow and find kernels of corn laying on the ground, dropped during the last harvest by the settlers. They were gathering that corn for food. The settlers discovered that, whipped the women, and took the corn away from them. On another occasion, a number of young white settlers got drunk. And when they saw a group of Dakota women out in the field digging in the snow in an attempt to find something to eat, they chased those women with the intent of assaulting them. The women, in a panic, were able to run all the way back to the Dakota village where they were safe. Inkpaduta and his warriors retaliated. They began shooting the settlers' cattle. And that's when the settlers formed the militia. The militia consisted of 18 to 21 men, all armed, led by a man who was a captain of the militia in Ohio, and he appeared in full military uniform. And the militia, led by that man, went to Inkpaduta's camp and told them 2 things. They needed to leave, and they needed to give up their weapons, turn their guns over to the militia. Inkpaduta was stunned. This was a death sentence. If they couldn't hunt, they knew, or he knew, that they could not survive. And he told them that. He told them that if they took the guns, they would be killing all of them, including women and children and babies. And the settlers didn't seem to care. Inkpaduta asked them, "What are we supposed to do?" And they suggested going to live with the Omaha tribe. Inkpaduta said, or told them, that the Omaha tribe would kill them if they showed up without weapons. Again, the white militia did not seem to care. The militia ripped the camp apart, took all the guns they could find, while the Dakota women and children ran into the woods in fear. Inkpaduta had no choice but to pack up and leave. It wasn't long after that one of Inkpaduta's grandchildren died, probably from exposure and starvation. Some historians believe that the events in Smithland, Iowa, changed Inkpaduta's relationship with the whites forever. With everything that had happened to his world and his family, it just pushed him over the edge. And he and his warriors went on a rampage. The band moved to the northeast, back towards Peterson, terrorizing any settler they could find along the way. They stole guns and ammunition, provisions, whatever they wanted. They shot cattle and hogs and destroyed property. And they beat anyone who resisted. Inkpaduta's band arrived back in Peterson on February 15, 1857, only 21 days before the massacre in Spirit Lake. They stayed for 3 days.
Upon their return to Peterson, the Dakota were extremely hostile. They went to the cabin of a man by the name of Meade. He was not there at the time. They shot his cattle, destroyed property, knocked his wife down, and they took his 17-year-old daughter, Maddie Meade, to their camp.
In the same cabin, they beat a man by the name of Taylor, kicked his boy into the fireplace and badly burned him, and took Taylor's wife to their camp along with Maddie. They also took another woman, a Mrs. Harriet, with them. All 3 women were held overnight, and during that time, they were repeatedly assaulted by the Dakota men. The Dakota released the women in the morning. After 3 days of terrorizing Peterson, Iowa, Inkpaduta and his band moved about 17 miles to the northeast along the Little Sioux River to a place called Gillette Grove, Iowa. This is Gillette Grove today. Very small, maybe 30 people living there. And again, at the time, back in 1856 and 57, there were very few people living there. And after Inkpaduta and his band arrived in Gillette Grove, something, I think, unusual happened. There was a cabin there occupied by a young couple, and apparently Inkpaduta and his warriors did not ransack it or attack the couple. Instead, they barged into the cabin and demanded hospitality. And the wife there made food for Inkpaduta and his warriors. They sat around the table and ate, while her husband stood back with a shotgun in hand and was very concerned about the attention that one of the warriors was paying to his young wife. Inkpaduta and his group then left, and later the young man in the cabin, the settler, saw that same Indian warrior lurking outside, moving towards the cabin. He assumed that he was coming to get or molest his wife, and so he shot the young Dakota man, and then apparently severed his head. There seems to be a lot of severing of heads going on the frontier back in those days. The young couple then did something that I think was quite extraordinary. They pulled out their sleigh and their horse, and they traveled through the winter prairie to get help from Fort Dodge. There were soldiers there, and that was 54 miles away across frozen prairie land. The young couple made it to Fort Dodge, and the military sent out 50 troops to find Inkpaduta and deal with the problem. In the meantime, Inkpaduta and his band had moved from Gillette Grove to Cherokee, Iowa, where they continued to further plunder cabins. The military, despite the hardship, actually trailed them to Cherokee. But when they got to Cherokee, they found that Inkpaduta and his band had already left, and they left towards the north, towards Spirit Lake. And the military, thinking that no settlers were in the Spirit Lake area, stopped, turned around, and went back to Fort Dodge. When Inkpaduta left Cherokee and headed for Spirit Lake, he was only 47 miles away from Abbie Gardner's doorstep. The military had turned around. They were not going to help anybody. And up until now, Inkpaduta and his band had not killed any white settlers. That was about to change.